Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The Pakistan Army says India is trying to divert global attention from its blunders by leveling baseless accusations against Islamabad. In a press briefing in Rawalpindi, military spokesman Major General Babar Iftikhar said, driven by extremist Hindutva ideology, India is violating international laws in occupied Kashmir and along the line of control. General Iftikhar said India's attempt to connect Muslims and Pakistan to the spread of the coronavirus has failed. The spokesman said Pakistan's military has played a vibrant role in the country's fight against COVID-19. General Iftikhar said the armed forces are securing the country's borders as well as helping establish screening and quarantine facilities. He also thanked China for playing a pivotal role by donating tons of medical equipment to Pakistan for its fight against the pandemic. Pakistan has extended a partial lockdown until 9th of May to curb the coronavirus spread in the country. Chaired by Prime Minister Imran Khan, a meeting of the National Coordination Committee urged people to continue adopting precautionary measures. The country has reported 237 deaths among over 11,000 COVID-19 cases, with over 2,500 recoveries. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has pledged to provide ventilators to Pakistan for coronavirus victims. In a briefing, President Trump said Pakistan has asked for ventilators and he has agreed to provide the country with the equipment. The United Kingdom has recorded 684 new deaths from the coronavirus in the last 24 hours, bringing the overall death toll to more than 19,500. However, Spain recorded the lowest number of daily deaths from the coronavirus in over a month, with 367 killed overnight. But the United States saw no let-up in COVID-19 deaths as the number of fatalities in the country approaches 50,000. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 192,000 lives with over 2.7 million cases of infection. Details in this report.
Scientists across the world are speeding up efforts to study the novel coronavirus in order to develop a vaccine. U.S. government researchers have revealed the virus survives best indoors and in dry conditions. They say COVID-19 loses potency when temperatures and humidity rise, and especially when it is exposed to sunlight. President Donald Trump said the findings should be interpreted cautiously, but predicted people will be eager to leave the house by summer.
To keep America gaining momentum, every citizen needs to maintain the vigilance, and we all understand that very well. We've gone over it many, many times. This includes practicing good hygiene, maintaining social distance, and the voluntary use of face covering.
Governments around the world are cautiously retreating lockdown measures under immense economic pressures. South Africa will partially reopen the economy on May 1st, easing travel restrictions. Meanwhile, over in Asia, Indonesia and the Philippines have extended the lockdowns. Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte says capital Manila will be under restrictions until May 15th. The country has one of the world's strictest community quarantines to curb the coronavirus infections.
If you continue the lawlessness, and it's happening all over the Philippines, maybe I will declare martial law because you rebels are disrupting the help and supplies being given to the people.
In China, the National Health Commission said half of the imported cases in the country have been discharged from hospitals after recovery. Meanwhile, 91 crew of the Italian cruise ship docked in Japan's southwestern port of Nagasaki have been infected with the coronavirus.
US President Donald Trump is facing a backlash over his comments that injecting disinfectants could be a potential treatment for the COVID-19. The remarks have drawn a huge online response and criticism by doctors. More in this report. This is not the first time that President Donald Trump's medical advice has generated controversy and criticism. He has previously hyped a malaria medication, hydroxychloroquine, as a potential treatment for the COVID-19. This was despite a lack of clinical evidence. Now, Trump once again came up with an idea that disinfectants might be able to kill coronavirus inside human bodies.
I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number in the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with, but it sounds interesting to me.
Medical experts condemned his comments as dangerous and irresponsible. A leading disinfectant producer, Reckitt Benckiser, has issued a strong warning that its products can't be used on the human body. Experts say disinfectants are hazardous and can be poisonous if ingested. Even external exposure can be dangerous to the skin, eyes, and respiratory system. Doctors have warned that Trump's suggestion could have fatal results. Well, the US says it will not become part of a global initiative to speed up the development of vaccines against COVID-19. In a briefing, a spokesman for the US mission in Geneva said Washington will not participate in global efforts of preparing antidote for COVID-19. He said the country is looking forward to getting updates about the initiatives to develop a vaccine. However, world leaders have pledged to accelerate work on tests, drugs, and vaccines against the pandemic. The United States has already suspended the funding for the WHO. NATO has urged the Taliban to immediately reduce violence and enter negotiations with the Afghan government. In a statement, the organization also called on the Afghan political leaders to resolve their differences and form an inclusive government. NATO went on to say that violence caused by the Taliban is unacceptable, but added that the process of releasing prisoners should be expedited. As of now, the Afghan government has freed nearly 500 Taliban prisoners in exchange for 60 security personnel. The two sides are required to release 6,000 prisoners as part of the Doha peace agreement. The prisoner swap is crucial for initiating intra-Afghan talks that will likely end the decades-long war in the country. The Saudi-led coalition has announced the extension of a unilateral ceasefire in Yemen by 1 month. A 2-week ceasefire announced by the coalition expired on Thursday without leading to a permanent truce. The coalition has blamed the Houthis for the failure to reach a lasting ceasefire, but the rebels accused the coalition of escalating violence after agreeing to a truce. They also demanded more concessions from Saudi Arabia before entering the UN-backed peace talks. This truce is in line with the United Nations call for a global ceasefire amid the COVID-19 outbreak. The United Nations has warned Israel against annexing parts of occupied West Bank. In a statement, UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, Nikolai Mladenov, said such unilateral actions are a serious violation of international law and will only lead to more conflict and suffering. Mladenov said Israel's annexation plan will mark a devastating blow to the two-state solution. He said the annexation will close the door to a renewal of negotiations and threaten efforts to advance regional peace. Earlier, the EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, said the bloc does not recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Palestinian territory. Borrell said the EU will continue to monitor this situation and its broader implications and will act accordingly. Israel's unity government has announced it will begin advancing annexation plans from July the 1st. In Germany's court, war crime charges have been read out against 2 members of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's security services. The holding of the trial has been hailed by the rights activists. They say this is a first step towards accountability for the war criminals who served Damascus during the Syrian civil war. This report has the details.
Thousands of Syrians have accused regime forces of crimes over the course of the brutal civil war, which also includes the indiscriminate bombing of residential areas and medical facilities. These reports have been repeatedly rejected by officials in Damascus, including Assad himself. One suspect has been charged with 58 murders in Germany, while the other with facilitating the torture of at least 30 opposition activists. The two also face charges of other heinous crimes against humanity, including torture and rape.
So they committed the crime with cold blood. Now it's everything changed. There is no way to have a immunity or to escape from punishment. Immunity time is over for all of them.
Speaking to the press, the plaintiff's lawyer said this trial is a direct message to the Syrian capital. He added his clients came forward against the defendants at great personal risk.
It's above all important that this trial is taking place. I think a lot of people, including our clients, have waited for a very long time that this finally takes off. It was a huge challenge for them to step out of the shadow and to speak about these crimes for the first time ever. That's impossible in Syria and tied to big risks.
It remains to be seen how consequential this trial will be for Syria and its allies. The country is not a signatory to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. An estimated 400,000 Syrians have been killed since the war began in 2011.
Turkey says it has killed 8 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in airstrikes during counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. The National Defense Ministry said military operations backed by air power were carried out in the Gara region. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters of the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. State media said PKK militants often use northern Iraq to plan cross-border terrorist attacks in Turkey. Moving on to Libya, where the UN-recognized government of the National Accord has rejected the European Union's plan to monitor the arms embargo on Libya. The spokesperson of President Faisal Sarraj, Hamad al-Zawi, says the GNA was not consulted over the decision. In a message to the UN Security Council, al-Zawi said this act is a violation of the UNSC resolutions. He said the EU has failed to differentiate between the aggressor and affected parties. Al-Zawi said the European Union plan neglects monitoring the air and the eastern land borders of Libya. Earlier, Khalifa Haftar-led Eastern Army denied GNA's accusation of using chemical weapons in the Salahuddin axis. The GNA said a civilian was killed in an attack on the Anzar region by the Eastern Army. The Saudi presidency of the group of 20 major economies has called for more funds for the coronavirus response. In a statement, the presidency said $1.8 billion have been donated towards a target of $8 billion. The G20 Secretariat said the donations were made by countries, philanthropic organizations and the private sector. Saudi G20 member Sherpa Fahad said global solidarity and cooperation is needed to fight the pandemic. He said it is the time for the bloc to support world efforts for a vaccine and other therapeutic measures to combat COVID-19. Meanwhile, the G20 tourism ministers will hold a virtual meeting today to discuss the impact of the virus on the travel sector. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. EU leaders have agreed to build a €1 trillion emergency fund to help the bloc recover from COVID-19 pandemic. In a video conference to consider proposals, EU leaders rallied around a bigger common budget for 2021 to 27, along with a recovery program. French President Emmanuel Macron argued that the step will put a burden on already heavily indebted countries like Italy, Belgium and Greece. EU leaders also approved over €500 billion in an immediate scheme to protect jobs, businesses and offer cheap credit to the governments.
We also agreed to work towards establishing a recovery fund which is needed and urgent. This fund should be of a sufficient magnitude, targeted towards the sectors and geographical parts of Europe most affected, and be dedicated to dealing with this unprecedented crisis.
Ecuador says the total number of coronavirus cases in the country is twice as high as previously confirmed. The health ministry said new cases resulting from delayed testing will be added to the confirmed total of 11,183 infections. Meanwhile, Costa Rica has reported a steady fall in the number of infections, having gone 3 days without any deaths from the virus. This report has the details.
Latin America is suffering but still putting up a great fight against COVID-19 despite its financial and political shortcomings. Brazil's new health minister Nelson Teich has played down the pandemic threat, saying the country has performed better than many others. But health experts say The outbreak is still far from its peak in Brazil as cases and deaths continue to rise sharply. Over in Peru, the number of infections has doubled in the past 9 days, crossing 20,000 as the country's President Martin Vizcarra extended a national quarantine.
The most important thing for a country is its people. It's the health of Peruvians, it's the lives of the people. As a result, the recommendation that we are once again putting out and thinking about what's best for Peruvians is to extend the state of emergency for 2 more weeks.
While helpful in stemming the disease, the lockdowns have exacerbated poverty in Peru and one of the most poorest nations in America, Honduras. In Venezuela, desperate people have resorted to looting and violence, 6 weeks into quarantine and suffering the worst fuel shortage in a decade. Meanwhile, Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador hopes for the normal resumption of industrial supply chains with the U.S. pending a review by authorities.
Regarding the immigration policy of the United States, we need each other mutually. One couldn't close the border completely because there's a degree of integration that makes it indispensable to keep the border open. In due course, there will be an agreement when they open, and we have pledged, above all with Mexican businesses, to analyze these openings.
Earlier, the Pan American Health Organization and World Health Organization warned the epicenter of the pandemic is moving from Europe towards the Americas.
Now, after a few months of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, doctors are rethinking their approach to ventilating patients. Medical professions in the US, Europe and China have recommended invasive ventilation be used sparingly, even in the most serious cases. COVID-19 kills people by activating a phenomenon known as a cytokine storm. This is when the body produces an excess of immune cells, causing high blood pressure, lung damage, and organ failure. When a patient can't breathe anymore, a mechanical ventilator takes over the entire breathing process, ensuring the body receives the oxygen it needs. Now, doctors say they may have been overusing this technique. Italian medical researchers have found this virus doesn't impact the lungs like other respiratory diseases. They found COVID-19 can cause acute respiratory distress without lowering the lungs' elasticity, meaning they can be damaged by ventilators if they are used at the usual pressure. One doctor has described it as using a Ferrari to visit the shop next door. Countries have rushed to place orders for mechanical ventilators since the COVID-19 crisis started. Now the world may see a greater push for alternatives such as oxygen masks. The World Health Organization has warned that the number of deaths caused by malaria in the sub-Saharan Africa can double to 769,000. This comes as the efforts to tackle the disease face disruptions due to the coronavirus pandemic. At a media briefing, WHO Regional Director for Africa, Matshidiso Moiti, urged all the countries to move quickly to save lives. He said the focus on slowing the spread of COVID-19 can lead to a 75% reduction in access to anti-malaria medicines. The region has registered more than 26,000 cases of COVID-19, while almost 1,250 have died so far. In 2018, there were 213 million malaria cases and 360,000 related deaths in the African region. The Rolling Stones have released their first single in 8 years dedicated to the coronavirus pandemic. The song Living in a Ghost Town is powered with a riff by Keith Richards. The video shows deserted streets and subway stations in London, Los Angeles, Kyoto, among other cities. Song Life was so beautiful. Now we all got locked down, feel like a ghost living in a ghost town. In a statement, Sir Mick Jagger said the band thought they will resonate with the times the world is living in. The band said the track was initially recorded a year ago in LA but was finished in lockdown. Richards said the song was completed via satellite before being released. On a coronavirus ward in London Hospital, award-winning filmmaker Hassan Akkad is working as a cleaner. In an interview, Akkad said he is glad to join the fight against the pandemic in his adopted home. More in this report.
The 32-year-old Syrian refugee has lived in London for 4 years. He made a footage of his journey, surviving a sinking dinghy from Turkey into Europe and then to UK. The film was part of a documentary series which won BAFTA in 2017 and International Emmy Awards. With the outbreak of the disease, he saw a way to thank the community that had helped him becoming a cleaner at Webb's Cross Hospital.
I've had a positive experience, and that's naturally led me to think that this is now become like home, you know, like this is where my friends and people that are now like my family live. And I wanted to pay it forward to the community that welcomed me with open arms.
Every shift, Akar and his colleagues need to disinfect every inch of a ward treating COVID-19 patients, all while wearing personal protective equipment that can leave him sweating and out of breath. He says he wants to tell the story of the pandemic in his community as well as promoting causes he is passionate about.
I am going to keep doing this job until I can physically and mentally be able to, no matter how long it takes. And when this is done, you know, I'm a storyteller. And I do want to tell that story, or I want to tell the hundreds of stories that I'm seeing and witnessing on a daily basis in my hospital, from the people that I work with and from the patients that I interact with.
Akar, however, bemoaned the lack of funding for the state-run National Health Service. The 32-year-old said he hoped the crisis would lead to more respect and value for cleaners and porters, who usually receive lower wages than most. Once the pandemic is over, Akar wishes to turn his attention back to filmmaking and storytelling.
Well, millions of Muslims around the world have begun observing the holy month of Ramadan, but this year they are facing a different kind of Ramadan in the face of the coronavirus pandemic. Details in this report.
This year, the fasting month has arrived amid social restrictions in place due to the coronavirus pandemic. Many Muslim-majority countries, including Indonesia, Saudi Arabia and UAE, have asked their citizens to stay at home.
Salat dimanapun.
For me, no matter where we are, the prayers must go on, even though we cannot pray in the mosque. The religious heads in the country have advised us to pray in our home. As a follower, all we can do is follow the instructions and do as we are told. As for the rest, we will leave it to God.
Para ulama di negeri ini.
Saudi Arabia's King Salman said he is saddened that Muslims cannot pray at mosques because of social restrictions, but in certain countries of the world, including Pakistan, the government urged people to pray at home but did not impose a ban. Medics have warned of dire consequences.
The Prime Minister has said that any mosque which does not follow the SOPs will be closed. Mr. Prime Minister, sir, it will be too late by then. When you realize this after a week or 10 days, lots of people will be searching for hospital beds. Many hospitals will be having ventilator problems.
In Ramadan, observant Muslims refrain from eating and drinking from dawn to dusk. The month of Ramadan will begin from tomorrow in Pakistan and certain other countries.
South Korea says neighboring North Korea has unusually increased its combat readiness operations. Defense Minister Jong Kong-do said Pyongyang is carrying out Air Force operations and inspecting its artillery's readiness. State media quoted Kong-do saying North's maneuvers have heightened regional tensions. He said Pyongyang is concentrating on developing weapons while remaining unresponsive to offer for talks. Earlier, a military official said the DPRK has increased its surveillance activities in the skies near the demarcation line with China over the Yellow Sea. North Korea has conducted an unprecedented 5 major weapon tests this year, along with smaller-scale artillery fighting drills. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, suspected militiamen have killed 16 people, including 12 security personnel at the Virunga National Park. Officials said rebels from the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda ambushed a convoy of civilians that was protected by 15 security personnel. They added that many people were seriously wounded in the attack. Virunga is a popular tourist attraction known for its large population of mountain gorillas. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. The US stocks have opened flat as investors wrapped up another volatile week with unprecedented upheavals in the oil market. Oil prices rose for third consecutive day, rebounding from a historic rout. The shares of Boeing dropped more than 4% over reports of the company planning to cut production of 787 Dreamliner. The stocks of Intel Corporation also shed more than 3% as it posted profits below estimates. All the major bourses landed in negative territories over the start of the weekend. The UK's economy is crumbling under the strain of the coronavirus lockdown as the government borrowing surges to the highest levels in peacetime history. Bank of England interest rate setter Jean Villag said Britain's economy is experiencing fastest and deepest contraction in centuries. But Villag said the economic situation will have exacerbated if the government and the Bank of England had not used unprecedented financial firepower. The UK's PMI plummeted to a new record low at just 12.9 for April, down from 36 in March. This was far below economists' forecasts and well short of the 38.1 reading recorded in the depths of the 2008 financial crisis. The European Bank of Reconstruction and Development has announced a $22.7 billion package to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. In a statement, the bank said the comprehensive package will cover the period between 2020 and 2021. It said the components include a resilience framework, trade finance, restructuring, support for new clients, and vital infrastructure. The package will focus on sectors hardest hit by the crisis, such as tourism, finance, manufacturing, and agribusiness. The World Bank says most commodity prices are expected to drop significantly in 2020 amid the economic fallout from COVID-19 pandemic. In its April Commodity Markets Outlook report, the bank said almost all prices saw a sharp decline in the past 3 months. The bank said monthly average crude oil prices plunged 50% between January and March. It said crude oil prices are expected to average $35 per barrel in 2020, a sharp downward revision from the October forecast. The report said overall energy prices, including natural gas and coal, are expected to average 40% lower in 2020, but will rebound in 2021. It said metal prices are projected to decline over 13% in 2020, while food prices are expected to be broadly stable. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.